This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. You can visit their store by using my referral link in the description below. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and it's Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10, the series where I rank cards based on their historical performance at Magic's highest level of competition. One of last week's top 10s took a look at the best white Planeswalkers, and today we're going to look at the Planeswalkers of another color, blue. Planeswalkers are one of the most powerful card types in all of Magic, and that makes sense. In the Magic lore, Planeswalkers are some of the most powerful beings in the multiverse, so their cards being super powerful lines up pretty well with that. You only have to pay a one-time mana investment for them, and then they get to give you a loyalty ability every single turn, and this value can be pretty hard for your opponent to overcome. To be eligible for this list, a card had to be a mono-blue Planeswalker. There are 27 cards that meet that requirement, and in this video we'll take a look at the 10 that have left the biggest impact on competitive Magic. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder on how I score cards in these videos. A top 8 at a Pro Tour, Players Tour, Mythic Championship, Mythic Invitational, Legacy, or Vintage Championship is worth 2 points, and a top 8 at a Magic Fest or Grand Prix is worth 1 point. At number 10, it is Tamiyo, the Moon Sage. She has a +1 that can lock down an opposing creature for an entire turn cycle. That goes a long way towards protecting her. Her -2 is also pretty nice, as it can draw you a card for every tapped creature your opponent controls, and most likely, they'll have at least one because of that +1 ability. She also has a pretty absurd ultimate, which gives you an emblem that lets you return any card that goes to the graveyard to your hand. Note that this includes anything, including instants and sorceries, so the value that gives you is pretty hard to beat. Like a lot of blue Planeswalkers, Tamiyo was well suited for control decks, and she gained all of her points in them in both block and standard. She hasn't seen play since 2013, so it seems likely some other blue Planeswalker will be pushing her off this list in the future. At number 9, it is Jace, Unraveler of Secrets, the first of several Jaces to make this list. This Jace is from Shadows over Innistrad, and he's in detective mode and all about figuring out why all sorts of weird stuff is happening on the plane. If you're ahead of your opponent when he comes down, you'll probably be using his +1 to gain even more of an advantage as a result of card draw. If you're a little behind, you'll probably bounce an opposing creature. Even if you are behind, he will usually be able to bounce a couple of things before going down, and that's not terrible for the mana investment. And if he's left unchecked and you can use that +1 all you want, he makes an emblem that counters the first spell your opponent casts every turn, which has gotta be one of the more frustrating emblems to play against. This Jace gained all of its points in Standard, primarily in control decks, but it also put up a few points in decks like Azorius Flash and Bant Company. Detective Jace doesn't have any points since rotating out of Standard. It is legal in Historic as a result of being printed in Amonkhet Remastered, but it is yet to make an impact on the format, and right now, Jace's chances of staying on this list don't look great. At number 8, it is Jace from War of the Spark, Jace, Wielder of Mysteries. Like other War of the Spark Planeswalkers, Jace comes with a static ability, and in this case it provides you with an alternate win condition. If you manage to empty your library and try to draw a card when Jace is in play, you win the game immediately. This pairs well with his +1 ability, which lets you get rid of 3 cards in your deck at a time. And because it's a draw ability, it can even be the effect that allows you to win the game with the static ability. His ultimate is pretty nice since it draws you a ton of cards, and it also comes with a potential win condition effect, though it is kind of redundant with the static ability. The only difference between the two is that you don't have to draw from your empty library to win the game in that case. Anyway, this Jace has gained all of its points in decks seeking to win the game by getting rid of their entire library. The only format it has ever gained points in is Pioneer, where it was part of one of the more dominant decks in the format, Dimir Inverter. The deck sought to use Inverter of Truth to get rid of the library, and then it would use either Jace or Thassa's Oracle to win the game. The deck was so dominant that ultimately the Inverter was banned in 2020. After the banning, it gained a few more points in standard decks like Lotus Field, and it has been played some in Historic, but it's yet to gain a top 8 there. At number 7, we take a break from a parade of Jaces with Tezzeret the Seeker, which was the very first Tezzeret we ever saw. All of Tezzeret's various incarnations really like artifacts, and that's definitely the case here. He has a +1 that can untap artifacts, something especially useful with mana rocks. He also has a -X that lets you tutor any artifact onto the battlefield, and he has an ultimate that turns all of your artifacts into 5/5s for a single turn. He didn't gain any points in block or standard, but has offset that fact by gaining points in formats with more powerful artifacts like Extended, Modern, Legacy, and Vintage. In all of these formats, Tezzeret played a key role in decks that sought to tutor up a variety of cheap prison artifacts to lock the opponent out of the game. Then, once you'd done that, Tezzeret could serve as the win condition by turning all of those artifacts into creatures for a turn. These decks came to be called Tezzerator as a result of the major role Tezzeret plays in them. He hasn't gained any points since 2019, but it's hard to ever count him out since he's already found success in multiple formats. At number 6, we return to another Jace. This one is Jace Memory Adept, who is super focused on milling. Jace has 2 separate abilities that let him mill. His +1 lets you draw a card and mill one of your opponents, while he has a 0 loyalty ability that mills a whopping 10 cards from the top of your opponent's library. This generally means that if Jace stays in play, he can mill your opponent out in 4 or 5 turns, so he represents a very real threat to your opponent. Jace was printed in Magic 2012, Magic 2013, and Magic 2014, giving him several years of standard legality, and he saw play in each of those standard formats. At first, he was played in decks like Blue-White Delver and Esper Control, and near the end of his time in standard, it was Devotion to Blue and Blue-White Control. Jace is unlikely to see play again outside of standard, but he did enough while he was there that it seems likely he sticks around on this list for a while. At number 5, we have another Jace. This is the original Jace from Lorwyn, simply called Jace Beleren. This Jace can work as a source of pure card advantage, using mostly his -1 ability, but sometimes you can also use the +2 ability to rapidly raise his loyalty, and his ultimate can do a pretty good job of milling your opponent out. He has also benefited from numerous reprints. After Lorwyn, he was also in Magic 2010 and Magic 2011. As a result, it has had a lot of time in Standard. Through his time in Standard, Fairy decks, Blue-Black Control, and Caw-Blade were its homes. Standard isn't the only format where Jace was played, though. He put up a few Grand Prix top 8s in Fairy decks in Lorwyn Block Constructed, Extended, and Modern. Apart from a stray Grand Prix top 8 in Modern in 2017, Jace hasn't put up any points since 2012. At number 4, it is Jace Architect of Thought. He comes with a +1 that weakens opposing attacking creatures, which can really make it difficult to take down a Planeswalker who's at 5 loyalty. His -2 is also a mini factor fiction, and is always going to net you at least 1 card, and often 2 at a time. And his ultimate, if you get there, lets you steal your opponent's best card and cast it for free. As you can imagine, this Jace is very well suited to control decks, and it's gained points in them in both Standard and Modern, though he doesn't have any points since 2018. He has been played a little bit in Pioneer more recently, but he's yet to put up a top 8 in the format. At number 3, it is Jace Vryn's Prodigy. It doesn't actually begin life as a Planeswalker, but as a creature. This is because he's from Magic Origins, where we got a cycle of creatures that could transform into Planeswalkers, with the idea being that the card represented the moment that their spark ignited and they became the Planeswalkers that we know today. While just a creature, this Jace comes with the ability to loot, which is a pretty nice effect on its own, but it is even nicer because it helps Jace transform in the first place, and once he does, he comes with a +1 that weakens creatures, which helps him survive, a -3 that lets you flashback a spell from your graveyard, and an ultimate that lets you quickly mill out your opponent. Jace has been particularly well suited to decks that can quickly load the graveyard and or are interested in doing stuff with spells. He was played a ton in Standard Control decks and has also found success in Modern, Legacy, and Vintage Delver decks. More recently, he's gained some points in Pioneer decks like Dimir Inverter and Sultai Delirium. Jace is likely to continue to gain points going forward, though he isn't exactly doing it at a rapid pace these days. At number 2, it's another non-Jace Planeswalker, Narset Parter of Veils. Narset isn't really the kind of Planeswalker who just takes over the games with super insane abilities. Instead, her power comes from her static ability, something Planeswalkers started to have, starting with War of the Spark, as we also saw in Jace Wielder of Mysteries. Her ability to keep people from drawing extra cards is super good, especially in the Eternal formats where she's played a ton. She was even restricted in Vintage because she was having such a huge impact on the format. She is gaining points at a pretty good rate, but it's unlikely she ever catches the number 1 card on this list, which is Jace the Mind Sculptor. This has to be the most shocking number 1 ever featured on an MTG top 10, right? Okay, obviously I'm kidding, as Jace is often considered one of, if not the best Planeswalkers ever printed, and his massive score certainly reflects that. One of the great things about this Jace is that he sports 4 loyalty abilities, not something a lot of Planeswalkers get, especially at 4 mana. One of them is a Fate Seal effect, where you can use him to control yours or your opponent's draws a bit more, while rapidly upticking his loyalty. He can also bounce creatures, and cast Brainstorm, and his ultimate can serve as a legitimate win condition if the game lasts long enough. While in Standard, he only put up 56 points, but this was largely because he was so dominant, helping to make Caw-Blade one of the most dominant decks Standard has ever seen, that he got banned after only being in Standard for a single year. In Extended, his primary home was Fairy decks, and when the Modern format was created, Jace was preemptively banned from the format, so he couldn't gain points there between 2011 and 2018. when he was finally unbanned in the format. He has gone on to gain some significant points in Modern, primarily in control decks. He's also seen a lot of play in Legacy ever since being printed, having seen play in a variety of decks like Stoneblade Miracle and control decks. The same is true in Vintage. A good sign a Planeswalker is powerful is probably that it sees play in Vintage pretty much the moment it gets printed, and that's what Jace did, seeing play in Landstill and Monastery Mentor decks. Jace is a heavily played card in multiple formats, and it's pretty hard to imagine him ever being dislodged from this list. Well, those are the 10 mono-blue Planeswalkers who've had the biggest impact on competitive Magic. If you want to own any of these powerful Planeswalkers, check out the description, where you'll find direct Card Kingdom links for every card that was in this video. If you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to catch up on past MTG Top 10s, including others about Planeswalkers, you should see some playlists on your screen shortly. Thanks for watching.